Alright, so, quick disclaimer. The vast majority of this video's production took place before we knew anything about Season 2, so if any little details don't line up, that's why. I still think the vast majority of what I talk about holds water. I just wanted to leave a little note at the beginning of the video to explain anything that might not line up with the current version of Marvel Rivals. Okay? Okay. When it comes to hero shooters, I'm a longtime support player. Ever since I was a kid and I picked up Team Fortress 2, I've always preferred playing characters who can support their teammates fighting on the front lines. I played tons of Engineer back in Team Fortress 2, a character who supports his team with health and ammo dispensers, teleporters, and powerful area denial sentry guns. When I eventually picked up Paladins, I quickly fell in love with Maldamba and Grok, and went on to love characters like Ceres, Io, and Corvus when they released. And in Overwatch, characters like Moira, Lucio, Zenyatta, and Ana were all love at first sight. So when I picked up Marvel Rivals, I quickly latched onto characters like Jeff, Adam Warlock, Loki, and Cloak and Dagger. And don't get me wrong, I've had fun with these characters, and I continue to have fun with these characters, but I find myself reaching a limit way sooner than I ever had before. I can't while away hours playing support in Rivals the same way I found myself doing so in other hero shooters. Having Adam Warlock in my back pocket helps because of his off DPS playstyle, but still, I find the support experience in Marvel Rivals lacking. And, in a way, it seems the community agrees with me on that. The pushback against the recent triple support meta has been heartening to see, because yes, it's not just a skill issue, the game's defensive support ultimates are lame to play around. A period of effective invincibility for both the support and their surrounding teammates effectively removes all choice from the enemy team. Their only recourse when one of these defensive support ults goes off is to counter it if they can, or wait it out, and they don't get to have a fight until they do. This is already strong and annoying enough, but being able to chain multiple of these ultimate abilities together is a recipe for long, boring games, and the counters to these abilities that people have come up with are either too difficult for the average player to pull off, or too costly compared to the cost of one support ult. With that in mind, I know many Rivals players are happy with the nerfs to the required ult charge for each of the support ultimates, and if I were content with the current state of the supports, I'd be happy too, but I'm not. They're addressing the problem of the supports not having to put enough resources into their ultimates, but that's not the problem. Not really. The problem lies in the chaining of the ultimates together. The over 30 seconds of effective invincibility for your team is game-changing, annoying, and toxic, but I want you to think for a moment about what the act of chaining these ultimates together entails. Luna Snow, Mantis, Cloak and Dagger, and Invisible Woman, that's half of the support roster, have ultimates that provide effective invincibility for them and their team, plus one if you count Loki's copy ultimate. Half of the supports have ultimates that enable this strategy. Half of the support ultimates do the same thing. That's the real support problem. That's the problem no amount of statistical nerfs will fix. Nerf their ult charge so they can't be spammed, reduce the healing so your teammates aren't invincible, introduce anti-healing, or implement any of the solutions people have suggested to fix the triple support meta, and it won't fix the problem. Because the problem is that half the support roster have ultimates that do the same thing. A strong AoE heal. And therein lies the real problem with supports. Now, I know some people will push back against this statement. The supports are given ultimates that save their teammates from dying, isn't that what they should do? And, well, these ultimates aren't without precedent. The genre has had a couple ultimate abilities that function similarly. In Paladins, you have Grover's ultimate, which gives a big burst of AoE healing, and in Overwatch, you have Zenyatta's ultimate, which is another AoE heal, and Lucio's ultimate, which is not a heal but serves the same purpose, giving everyone in its radius tons of temporary overhealth to save them from death. However, while these games are similar, they handle these ultimate abilities a lot more gracefully. At first glance, you might think Zenyatta's ultimate is even stronger than something like Luna Snow's, because while she merely becomes much harder to kill, Zenyatta is outright invulnerable during his ultimate's duration. However, his ultimate doesn't last nearly as long. With one exception, this is the unifying factor with all these similar ultimate abilities. They don't last for nearly as long as the ones in Rivals do. The overhealth Lucio gives decays rapidly, and the duration of Grover's ultimate is even shorter than Zenyatta's. The exception is Lifeweaver from Overwatch, whose Tree of Life is a powerful AoE heal that lasts for quite a while. However, His ultimate is set apart by the fact that it takes the form of a massive deployable that is static and can be destroyed. There's also the fact that both Overwatch and Paladins have anti-healing. In Overwatch, you have Ana, a support character who has a thrown grenade that inflicts it, whereas in Paladins, you have the global anti-healing system, where a global anti-healing percentage that ticks up as the match goes on is applied whenever someone is hit by any character's primary weapon. But putting that aside, you notice how I've only given 4 examples out of 2 games? Yeah, that's because the support ultimates in these games are so much more varied. In Overwatch, you have Mercy and Brigitte's ultimates, which are enhancement ultimates, Kirika's ult, which gives a powerful AoE buff to ally speed and fire rate, and Alari's ult, which allows her to become the main character for a moment. Then in Paladins, you have Maldamba's ultimate, which inflicts a fear effect and a large AoE, Corvus's ultimate, which creates a lingering area that damages and slows while allowing the Corvus to safely reposition, Furia's ultimate that provides a direct damage buff to her and all nearby allies, and Aya's ultimate, which can send people to the fucking Shadow Realm. A support ultimate can be so much more than just a big AoE heal, and even when they are big AoE heals, they can be handled so much better than they are in Rivals. But if you're still not convinced, I just want you to imagine something real quick. Imagine if half the tanks in Marvel Rivals had Doctor Strange's ultimate, or if half the DPS had Iron Man's ultimate. Put aside all thoughts of game balance too, and just think for a moment about how lame that would be. These ultimate abilities are cool and strong, and they perfectly fit Doctor Strange and Iron Man's kits thematically, but imagine how much less cool they would be if they had to share their strong thematic ultimates with half their role's roster. And think about how much lesser the other tanks and DPS characters would be because of it. Instead of having their own cool thematic ultimates to help fulfill the fantasy of playing that character, which is the whole point of a hero shooter like this, they would all just have the same ultimate. They would all be making the same play. And furthermore, imagine playing against that. A Doctor Strange ult or an Iron Man ult should be an oh shit moment, not an oh of course moment. Getting hit by an enemy ultimate should be just as exciting as using your own, and there's nothing exciting about having to face the same ultimate from multiple sources several times in one match. The support ultimates in their current state are this scenario realized. An ultimate that makes your entire team unkillable should be an oh shit moment. It should be a cool, exciting play that instantly changes the dynamic of a fight. But instead it's an oh of course moment because half the supports can do it. I mean, let's look at that Lucio clip I used earlier. We're fighting for the point, and Isira Ramantra is getting low and having trouble pushing onto the point, so I ult to enable us to move up. Then, in all the chaos, we manage to snag a kill against one of the enemy DPS. The enemy team sees all this and goes, oh shit, and starts retreating up these stairs. We swarm onto the point, but then the enemy tank gets hit with a nano boost, and now it's our turn to go oh shit. Now we're dealing with a nigh unkillable tank, and we start retreating down these stairs. In all the confusion, though, I managed to snag a kill on the enemy Ana, and we hold our ground, taking the point. What we had there was an exciting back and forth. The dynamic of the fight there changed multiple times. And this got to be a cool moment because both sides aren't Lucio ulting multiple times every 2 minutes. If this happened in Rivals, I would use a support ult to push up, the enemy would counter with their own ult, and then both teams would just be left standing there. And then it would happen again. And again. Over and over throughout the match because half of the supports have the same ultimate. And all of the supports who have these ultimates are lesser for it, because in what way does a big AoE heal help realize the fantasy of playing as Invisible Woman, or Cloak and Dagger, or Mantis? It just doesn't, and that's missing the entire point of a hero shooter. What separates hero shooters from other multiplayer shooter games are the heroes. Instead of playing faceless Call of Duty man number 7, you're playing as a character with lore and a personality, and you get to see how their story and personality is reflected in their gameplay. Now, as much as I'd love to get to the part of the video where I start suggesting cool, new, thematic ultimate abilities for the supports in Marvel Rivals, I can't yet. because the problem with Marvel Rivals' supports doesn't stop there. While half the support roster has the same ultimate, it's in the rest of their kits where I really find the support experience in Rivals lacking. Have you ever noticed how Luna Snow and Mantis have more or less the same kit? I've been talking about how the support ultimates are the same, but Luna Snow and Mantis actually just have the same ult. They both have an AoE heal that manifests as a circle centered around them alongside a speed boost. And the only real difference is that Luna Snow heals more, but can't attack during her ultimate, whereas Mantis doesn't heal as much, but she can attack while she's ulting. But even beyond their ultimates, they both get a stun that ends prematurely if the victim takes any additional damage, and they both get a passive speed boost. Of course, Mantis and Luna Snow do play pretty differently, but the supports have a lot of similarities like this, and they all culminate in a couple big problems they all share. Let's start simple. Have you noticed that all but 2 of the supports heal primarily by attacking or otherwise using their weapon? The only ones that don't are Adam Warlock and Mantis, and when I first noticed it, it immediately struck me as odd. Once again, it's not like this isn't without precedent in the hero shooter genre. Most of the supports in Overwatch function similarly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different in Rivals, and I think I figured it out. It's not just that they all heal by attacking, it's also that all of the supports in Rivals are dead simple. They lack depth, and this is compared to Overwatch, whose characters pale in comparison to the likes of Paladins when it comes to depth. I mean, let's look at, say, Baptiste. He's similar to Rocket in Rivals in that his primary deals damage while his ult fire is a heal. For both characters, both of these are tied to their weapons, and when they reload one, they're reloading both. They also have quite different forms of mobility, but they both function similarly in encouraging you to find weird angles, get up on high ground, and play evasively when you need to defend yourself. Their ultimates are similar as well, working to buff yours and your allies' damage. The key differences come in their other abilities, as well as the minutiae of how their kits work and are used. Rocket's final ability is his Revive Beacon, which works quite simply. You place the beacon down as a deployable that can be destroyed by enemies. The beacon will then start dropping armor packs and will occasionally drop a jump pack, though that's very much a secondary function of the beacon. The armor packs only give a measly 25 extra health, which might as well be nothing, and the jump packs are only really useful for specific characters like Wolverine. The main function of the beacon is that if an ally dies inside the beacon's range, they will almost immediately be revived at the beacon's location, and the beacon will then be destroyed. The beacon has a whopping 45-second cooldown, but it is very strong. I've personally had games won and lost because a star player managed to get revived and was immediately pushed back into the fight. The beacon is, however, completely brain-dead simple for the Rocket player to use. Using the Revive Beacon effectively amounts to this. You place it before the beginning of the round and allow whoever benefits most from getting the jump pack to take it. Then, when the round starts, you replace the beacon in a spot that's hidden but still in range of the team fight. Finally, if your beacon is used, or if an enemy destroys it, remember to place another one when the cooldown is up. That's it. When it comes to using Rocket's beacon, you don't have to think about it at all. The only real form of skill expression is memorizing where on each map is best to place the beacon. Now let's compare this to Baptiste. He has 2 abilities beyond what I've already mentioned. The first is simple. It's an AoE burst of healing on a fairly long cooldown. The second is his Immortality Field, or his Lamp, as people have nicknamed it. The Lamp is also on a long cooldown, and rightfully so. It's a deployable that, when placed, emits a small AoE that when you or your allies stand inside it, prevents your health from being reduced below a certain percentage, making you unkillable. The lamp's duration isn't very long, nor does it have much health, but in the fast-paced environment of Overwatch, it is a game changer when used properly. Used properly being the keywords here. Both of Baptiste's abilities are powerful but on long cooldowns and are far from the fire and forget of Rocket's beacon. These abilities have multiple use cases, and you need to have good game sense to determine how you should be using them. For most lower skill players on Baptiste, his heal and his lamp are mainly going to be used to save your own life if someone dives you. At higher skill levels, though, things get more interesting, particularly with the lamp. Throwing the lamp to save a star player and keep the fight going can be a game-changing play, but it requires you to be constantly analyzing the battlefield. You need to determine who the star players are, who is in actual danger of being knocked down, whether or not it's a good idea to try and keep the fight going, and while all this is happening, you need to remember that using your cooldowns to save yourself is still a valid approach depending on the situation. So is it worth it to sacrifice your own survivability for the sake of keeping your teammates in the fight? Furthermore, if you want to save someone from dying with your lamp, you need to be able to follow up on it. The lamp doesn't heal at all by itself, so you either need to have good aim and coordinate with your fellow supports, or you need to run it down and use your AoE heal if you want to pull your teammate's ass out of the fire. And none of this is even mentioning that the lamp is thrown out as an arcing projectile, meaning there's further skill involved in being able to aim it properly. But it still doesn't stop there. Baptiste's kit overall is just way more active and requires you to think way more. Let's look at his weapon again, comparing it to Rocket's. Rocket's primary is a minigun that rapidly shoots projectiles and deals very respectable close-range sustained damage. His alt-fire, meanwhile, shoots balls that slow down and heals both Rocket and his allies as they fly through the air. Baptiste, meanwhile, has a primary that shoots a hit-scan 3-round burst, with an alt-fire that shoots healing grenades that heal allies in a small radius. Baptiste's heal is more engaging to use than Rocket's because it requires you to aim more, but the more crucial difference lies in how the two shoot the enemies. For Baptiste, due to his weapon's respectable burst damage and hit scan, it's often beneficial to line up a shot in between bursts of healing. Rocket's weapon, however, is not built for this. Like I said, his weapon is best for sustained fire at close range, and while this does work for defending himself, it's ineffectual at best when trying to weave his fire in with his healing while at range. And during a team fight, healing at range is most of what you're going to be doing. This difference means that Baptiste is simply much more engaging to play than Rocket. Simply put, you get to shoot the enemies way more with Baptiste than you do with Rocket in these games about shooting the enemies. But again, it doesn't stop there. Their ultimates have the same distinction. With Rockets, you place your amplifier down, and that's it. It provides a damage buff to every friendly in its radius. Baptiste's ultimate, meanwhile, sees him placing a window that, when shot through, greatly increases the damage dealt by you and your allies. Every time you use this, there's a decision. Do you want to get up on an angle and use this to try and get picks, or use this on the ground to try and create space with a strong gun line? Again, there's more decisions, more skill expression, and it's more active, which means it's more satisfying to play with. This is the issue with most of the supports in Rivals. Their kits aren't as engaging or satisfying to use compared to the support kits in other hero shooters. And I could go on about the differences between the designs of these two games, but I want to point out that the supports in Rivals aren't designed this way for no reason. This lack of depth stems from two of the game's core design decisions. The first of these two core design decisions is a doctrine of extreme simplicity in the game's character designs. Every character in Rivals is dead simple to understand. Even the characters like Black Panther and Spider-Man, which are labeled with 4 and 5 stars on the game's difficulty scale, aren't hard to understand. They're just hard to get results with. Rocket's abilities, like a lot of the hero abilities, are simple and easy to understand how to use in order to make the kit as approachable as possible. The second decision, oddly enough, is the thing about this game that has perhaps gotten the most praise. Marvel Rivals boasts an extremely low time to kill, which is the rough average amount of time it takes for a character to reduce another character from being alive to being less so. The TTK in this game is lower than Overwatch, much lower than Paladins, but perhaps a bit higher than Team Fortress 2. The simplicity and this low TTK are core to the game's identity, and they make the game both easy to pick up and have fun with and enable the fantasy of playing as a superhero by making every character feel powerful. People have rightfully praised these design decisions, but they have further-reaching consequences than most people seem to realize. In most hero shooters, a support character generally leverages healing, utility, and additional offensive power. Let's take the medic from Team Fortress 2 for example. He heals with his minigun, has utility in being able to give people temporary overhealth and enabling big offensive and defensive maneuvers with his supercharge, and can deal good, long-range burst damage with the Crusader's crossbow. In Rivals, though, the low time to kill and the desire to keep things as simple as possible has sacrificed many of the support's fun utility options, and indirectly but greatly nerfed their potential offensive power. Let's start with utility. I've already mentioned Rocket and how his revive is strong, but not very fun or satisfying to use. You just place it and forget about it. And this is the story for most of the supports. Most of them have some combination of limited utility options and/or utility options that aren't very satisfying to use. Let's break it down character by character. Luna Snow's most obvious utility ability is her stun, but it has extremely limited use. The stun ends prematurely if the victim takes any additional damage, meaning it's very hard to leverage during a big fight. That leaves it more or less solely used for escaping from dives and interrupting ultimates. And while Luna Snow does have this nice combo where you can hit 2 headshots in a melee before the stun prematurely ends, in the chaotic environment of a hero shooter, it's highly unlikely the average player can pull this off in game with any consistency. In most circumstances, if you hit your stun, you back up, keep healing, and hope someone on the front line backs up or someone on the back line comes forward to help you deal with your target. Luna Snow also has Ice Arts and Share the Stage, but these hardly improve matters. Ice Arts enhances Luna Snow's primary fire, turning it into a piercing shot that comes out slower, but deals increased healing and damage. This gives Luna Snow some decent utility in being able to heal allies and damage enemies at the same time, but it does very little to shake up or enhance Luna Snow's gameplay. You kind of just pop it and then you keep shooting. Share the Stage, meanwhile, allows Luna Snow to mark an ally, and whenever Luna Snow heals someone other than that ally, they'll get healed as well. While simple, this is pretty strong, but it's let down due to how awkward it is to use. Unlike similar abilities in other games like Corvus's Mark and Paladins, the marks won't automatically be applied to a different ally if the already marked ally dies, and keeping track of who's marked and when your marked ally dies is a tremendous pain that's more frustrating than fun. Loki has one piece of utility, but it is very strong. Loki's totem creates a healing field on top of him and all of his clones, where all damage dealt to friendlies is converted to healing, making them unkillable. It's similar to Baptiste's lamp, but it is so much less satisfying to use. Loki's totem is placed right next to him and his clones, so there's no skill or risk involved in aiming it or having to break line of sight to throw it at your feet. In addition, as we've previously mentioned, the lamp doesn't heal and only prevents death, so while it can prolong someone's life, there's no guarantee that they'll be able to stay in the fight for long when it goes away unless you can follow up on it. The same is not true for Loki's totem. You place the totem, you and your allies stand in it, and that's all you have to do. Everything else is done for you. There's also the fact that your clones use it too, which effectively triples the totem's normal range. So Loki's totem is basically the lamp on easy mode in every way. Jeff has really nice utility in being able to speed boost his teammates with his bubbles, and he can leave bubbles around the map to provide allies with heals even when he's absent or if his attention is turned elsewhere. But that's it. And once again, you barely have to think. You just place the bubbles and they work. You hardly even have to worry about their placement because their cooldown is so forgiving. Now, for Cloak and Dagger, I will give them credit, but they still aren't as good as they could be. C and D, or rather just C, have their Ghost form and their Blind. These abilities are really good and reward good timing and game sense, but their problem is that you use them, and then most of the time, you immediately have to swap back to Dagger and keep healing. You, as the Cloak and Dagger player, hardly ever get to follow up on the advantages created by your utility abilities, which makes them feel a lot more simple and easy to use than they would otherwise be. I'm going to leave that there, though, as we will be returning to this when we talk about the low TTK. Invisible Woman is similar to Cloak and Dagger. She has two abilities, a push/pull that works in a cylinder in front of her, and her Vortex Field, which deals damage and slows in its radius, in addition to sucking flying characters out of the air. These abilities are nice offensive utility, especially when used in tandem, but Invisible Woman can struggle to follow up on them. This is both because of the TTK issue, which we'll get to, but also because her damage is just extremely anemic, And like I said with Cloak and Dagger, this inability to follow up on these abilities makes them feel much less interesting to use. One thing I will give her credit for, though, is her shield. This one takes some skill, timing, and game sense to use properly, and feels good to use because of how strong barriers like this are. Blocking damage, stuns, and other abilities is really powerful, but the shield has very low health, and it also heals allies around it. This makes you constantly consider how best to use your shield. Do you use it as a fallback point for your squishy teammates to get heals while you focus on healing the tanks? Do you use it to help your DPS peek a sightline, or is it best to throw on the tank so you can get a better chance of surviving in the enemy push? That leaves us with Mantis and Adam Warlock, and these two have to be evaluated differently because of how unlike the other support characters they are. Unlike the other supports, they don't heal primarily using their weapon. Their heals work off of cooldowns, and that means their kits are freed up to focus on leveraging their additional offensive power. This does give them extra points because of how much more active they are to play, but I do still want to talk about their utility options, because I do still find them kind of lacking. Mantis gets a damage boost and Luna Snow's stun. The latter has all the same problems as Luna's stun, and while at first the damage boost seems attractive, it's another fire and forget ability that's not very exciting to use. You throw a damage boost on your ally, and you hope they achieve something with it. And outside of certain edge cases like enabling Black Widow to insta-kill people with a headshot, an ally with a damage boost and an ally without one are usually hard to tell apart performance-wise. Now I do think Adam Warlock is a bit better. He only has one utility ability in his Soul Bond, but this one I think is very fun to use. The Soul Bond takes damage dealt to you and your bonded allies and distributes it evenly among them. This is a strong effect, strong enough to allow you and your allies to survive an Iron Man ult if there's at least 4 allies in the bond, but it can screw you over. If someone in the bond is on low health, the damage being redistributed to them can get them killed, so you can't just fire off a Soul Bond willy-nilly, you need to be paying attention. In addition, the Soul Bond doesn't last for very long and has a very long cooldown, so similar to Baptiste's Lamp, there's some excitement that comes from using it properly. So I will give Adam Warlock points, but I'd like to repeat that this is Adam's only utility option, and it's another ability where you just press a button and it works. Okay, so I find most of the support characters to have lackluster utility options because they are either limited or they are unsatisfying to use, and these issues stem, in part, from the desire to keep things as simple as possible. Now we move on to talking about the low time to kill. Now I said earlier that most of the supports in Marvel Rivals struggle to leverage additional offensive power in fights. This isn't because they're lacking in damage or in ways to initiate, but rather it's because of the environment they find themselves in, the game's doctrine of simplicity, and the way these two work in tandem to influence the design and playstyle of most of the supports. During a game of Marvel Rivals, at any moment, anyone could get hit with a big burst of damage. Most of the characters in the game can throw out big bursts of damage like this, and most of them are also more than capable of following up on them. So at any moment, anyone in a match can die in literal seconds, and sometimes even less. Now, Marvel Rivals isn't looking to be a high lethality game like casual TF2, so it wants its supports to be able to save people from dying in these scenarios. But in order to do this, most of the supports need to always be able to produce healing at any moment. At the same time, though, the supports need to conform to the game's doctrine of simplicity. So the supports need to be able to be providing healing at any given moment, and they need to be easy to understand. Well, there's very little easier to understand than shooting, so most of the supports are each given the ability to heal by shooting their allies. Now both of these design decisions, the low TTK requiring supports to be able to heal at any given moment, and the supports being simple and healing primarily using their weapons, would be fine in and of themselves. However, with both of them, we find ourselves with a problem. Most of the supports very rarely get to engage the enemies in combat. They rarely ever get to shoot the enemies in this game about shooting the enemies. Oh sure, they can defend themselves, they can help clean up if their team is winning a fight and the enemy is on the back foot, but they can't initiate, they can't play aggressive on the front line or on the flank, and they can't chase kills, not without putting their team at serious risk. Most of the time, you can't turn your gaze away from your team and focus on shooting the enemies for even a moment, because the game's damage numbers are so insane that looking away from your teammates to try and engage an enemy or even stopping to reload for just a second could spell death for one or more of your teammates. And just so everyone understands, in a vacuum, the supports are more than capable of engaging in combat in a variety of ways. Loki can sneak up on people and assassinate them with the huge damage he and his clones are capable of. Cloak and Dagger have nice offensive utility in being able to use Dagger's homing shots to easily harass flyers out of the air, and Cloak has very respectable sustained damage, especially when enemies are made vulnerable by his blind. Luna Snow's high speed, stun, and hit scan allow her to chase people and hold her own in combat. Jeff does really respectable damage and can work as an effective harasser thanks to his good mobility, and so on. But none of this matters because if you try to focus on doing any of these things, your teammates will just explode because you're not focusing all of your attention on healing. I mean, look at this. Let's say there's a Cloak and Dagger, and this Moon Knight is their teammate. Let's also say there's an Iron Man flying about that this Cloak and Dagger could get an angle on. The Cloak and Dagger player clearly sees that the Moon Knight is at full health, so they think there's no harm in turning their gaze away to try and use Dagger's homing shots to harass that Iron Man out of the air. What they don't see is that there's an enemy lurking on the flank, and they're about to kill Moon Knight faster than the Cloak and Dagger player could possibly react.
Incoming! Target neutralized.
Wow. Okay. Well, Winter Soldier is kind of overtuned, so let's look at a more reasonable character. Let's say Moon Knight.
Your power. Good night.
Oh, well, Human Torch isn't all that great. Let's look at...
You don't look so hot.
As expected. Lightning strike.
Piece of cake. You were unfit.
You're mine.
Spider sling. I don't want to hit you more than I have to.
Okay, well, those are all DPS characters, right? They're supposed to do good damage. Let's see about the tanks.
The wrath of Asgard! Awaken fury! I am Groot!
Ancient One, I hope my successes make you proud.
Oh, well, that last one wasn't so bad.
Double kill!
Jesus Christ. Alright. Now this is all just a hypothetical scenario, but you should get my point. The moment the support turns away to try and play offensively, their teammate can drop dead near instantly without the support to intervene. So now this is anecdotal, but I've personally noticed that the problem with nobody wanting to play support is worse in Rivals than it is in any of the other hero shooters I've talked about so far. And I believe this is why. Most of the supports in Rivals have to focus all of their attention on healing at almost all times, leaving them unable to actually play the game they signed up for. And for most people, this isn't fun. And some of you watching might be thinking that giving the supports the ability to do more in combat is a nightmare scenario, but it really isn't. I mean, first off, Mantis and Adam Warlock are characters in Rivals who are supports that can consistently engage in combat, and it's not like they're the most OP characters in the game. Second off, every other hero shooter I've played has had supports that consistently engage in combat, and it's not like any of those supports are oppressive and game-ruining either. I've already mentioned Baptiste and how his kit encourages him to line up a couple of shots in between bursts of healing, but he's far from the only example. Also from Overwatch, we have Moira, who literally has to play upfront and aggressive because she replenishes her healing resource by dealing damage. There's also Lucio and Brigitte, who hardly even have to try to heal their team and instead mostly do it passively, allowing them to focus on fighting the enemies. There's also Kiriko, who, similar to Baptiste, loves to line up shots in between bursts of healing. Then, from paladins, you have my beloved Graka and Maldamba, who place down an AoE heal and can just forget about it, allowing them to focus on shooting the enemy. There's also Grover, who mostly heals passively and through cooldowns, which allows him to focus on shooting, and you also have characters like Ceres, Corvus, Rhea, and Io, who, again like Baptiste, love to line up shots in between bursts of healing. And that's not even mentioning the weird alternate playstyles they can engage in thanks to Paladins' various unique systems. And all of the games I've talked about have characters who don't shoot the enemies often and mostly heal. There's the Medic in Team Fortress 2, as well as Mercy and Lifeweaver from Overwatch. But the thing that differentiates these examples from Rivals is that it's not nearly most of the supports who function this way. And if you don't understand why most of the supports not being able to consistently engage in combat is a problem, I really don't know how to put it to you. This is a multiplayer competitive shooter game. When the average person picks up and plays this kind of game, they want to have fun shooting the enemies and making big, impactful plays. And Marvel Rivals does a very good job of making shooting the enemies and making plays fun. We've already talked about how the reason this game's heroes are so fun is because they achieve the power fantasy of playing as a powerful superhero, but the supports don't get to participate in that power fantasy consistently. Most of the supports hardly ever get to make plays, or chase kills, or shoot the enemies at all, so for the average person, the supports just aren't fun. You want to know my pet theory as to why half the supports have the same ultimate? I think it's because if they make their whole team effectively invincible, they don't have to worry about healing, and they get to have a moment where they get to actually focus on pushing the enemies. Without having to worry about healing, they get to try and make a play, engage in combat, get a kill, which is what we're all here for. Like here, in this clip. You could see I use a Cloak and Dagger ult to push into the enemy's backline, and because my team doesn't have to worry about healing, I get to snag a kill against the Atom Warlock and apply additional pressure on the enemy Groot, Punisher, and Iron Man. And speaking of the ultimates, you want to know why the triple support ultimate became so popular? It's not just because you can chain their ultimates together for long periods of invincibility. I think it's because, outside the ultimates, a triple support comp is flat out more fun for the support players. This whole time I've been talking about supports hardly ever getting to shoot the enemies, I've been under the assumption that you're playing a traditional 2 support comp. Most casual games of Rivals, and most other hero shooters, will be in these 2 support comps after all. But things really get shaken up in a triple support comp. With 2 other supports helping to shoulder the burden of healing, the average support player gets to make plays, engage in combat, and have fun shooting the enemies way more often than with 2. With 2 other supports backing you up, you can look away from your team for a bit without putting them at insane risk. Now some of you might be saying, isn't jumping in and healing your team a cool play? Isn't using your ult to make everyone invincible a cool play? Well, kinda, but less so, and not in the way most people can appreciate. Healing your team is a Sisyphean task that's only satisfying when it has a noticeable impact. Like when you arrive just in time to save a tank from death and that's what manages to save the round. And even then, that satisfaction is lessened by the fact that you're constantly healing all the time. For the most part, all healing is doing is prolonging a fight, not advancing it in the way a DPS or tank does. And while there are weirdos like me who can appreciate that, especially when things get hectic, I don't think most other people can. And using one of Rivals' support ults can be kinda cool, but it's similarly cheapened by the fact that these make your team unkillable ults are going off all the time. There's also the fact that they take very little skill and timing to use well, considering how powerful these ultimates are, their durations, and how quickly they charge even after the nerfs. But more importantly, the main thing a support ultimate does is remove choices. By making your whole team unkillable, you've removed a lot of gameplay from both you and the enemy team. You don't have to prioritize who to focus heals on, and you don't even have to worry about dodging either. You can stand still and just shoot the enemy team, and most characters have nothing to say about that. While it's nice that you're given a moment to focus on fighting the enemies, like I said earlier, that moment is made so much less fun because there's no risk, and therefore no excitement. Making a big play, like jumping into an entire enemy team and ulting as Doctor Strange, is exciting because you know you might die doing it. The excitement comes from pulling it off in the face of the risk. Remove the risk, remove the excitement. And none of this is even mentioning that the support ults really aren't fun for the enemy team either. What a support ult does for the enemy team is the same for what it does for the support player and their team, but worse. The enemy team has no choices when you're under the effect of a support ult. They can't kill you unless they have a character with a combo or an ultimate that counters yours on standby, so if they miss that combo or flub that ultimate, what can they do? Nothing. The enemy team can't do anything except hope their team doesn't get rolled by their invincible foes. And I know most people probably don't give a shit about the enemy team's feelings, but I'm of the philosophy that fun has to go both ways, or else it's not fun. The support ultimate isn't fun for the enemy team, so it's not fun for me either. And again, the support is doing nothing to actually advance the fight. A defensive ultimate does nothing to advance the fight by itself. All it does is put the fight on pause. That said, I don't think most people will deny that doing whatever a support does will never hit the same as killing the enemies does. But what the problems with the Rivals support experience do more than anything else is exacerbate a problem I think all support players can relate to. Feeling helpless to do anything to swing the game when it's going south. If you've played a fair amount of games as support, you've no doubt run into a situation where you feel stuck and your team isn't doing anything to fix it. Nothing that you want to be happening is happening, and as you look out over the battlefield, you notice that you might just be able to make that breakthrough if only you could take a moment to engage the enemies yourself. But you can't. You can't push or engage, because if you do, your team will start dropping dead and the front line will completely collapse without you to babysit them. This problem is so much worse in Rivals for the reasons we've already discussed. And it feels so bad because you can see it in your mind's eye. You, the support player, taking the initiative and being the playmaker. And while it might happen eventually, in Rivals, those occurrences will be so extremely few and far between. And for most people, this waiting on the sidelines and watching other people play the game just isn't fun. So real quick, as a final thing, because I know some people watching have been thinking it for a while, let's talk about the team-up abilities. These abilities are a system unique to Marvel Rivals, where when two or more characters with a team-up are on the same team, they get new abilities they wouldn't have otherwise. In theory, these might be able to give the supports some additional utility or offensive power, making them more fun, more able to make plays, whatever. In practice, though, things really aren't made much better. For most of the supports, their team-ups are either too simple to be interesting to use, or the support functions as the team-up anchor. What that means is that they get a passive stat boost, and that's it. Actually using and benefiting from the team-up falls to the support's teammates. So, Adam Warlock is the anchor for the Guardian Revival team-up, so that's nothing for him. However, Mantis benefits from this team-up, so what does it do? This team-up allows Mantis to revive herself shortly after death on a 2-minute cooldown. This is pretty cool, and useful to boot since the support getting knocked down is a big deal and giving them the ability to self-revive is nice. However, it's another strong ability that's just not very interesting to use. When you die, you look around and ask these questions. Is your team losing the fight? If they are, can you make a difference? And if you can, where is a safe place to revive? I'll admit that someone else might find this kind of analysis in the middle of a match exciting, but considering the fact that this ability is on a 2-minute cooldown, I don't imagine even they will get much enjoyment out of this. Both Rocket and Jeff benefit from the Planet X Pals team-up, but this is about as useful as not having a team-up at all. This team-up allows Rocket and Jeff to hop onto a friendly Groot's shoulder. In this state, they can't move, instead relying on Groot to ferry them around, but they do get some damage resistance. The obvious thought here is, why the fuck would you ever want to do this? It makes you a more obvious target, and one of Rocket's and Jeff's biggest strengths is that they are small and elusive. The damage resistance is so pathetic that it doesn't do anything to counteract this. You are immediately forced off of Groot's shoulder if he gets stunned, and Groot is a tank, so he's gonna get stunned all the fucking time. It makes aiming much more awkward because it's impossible to predict how the Groot is going to move, and most damningly of all, it distracts you from healing, which, as we've discussed, means your teammates suffer a lot. Rocket gets another team-up, that being Ammo Overload, but while it's strong, it's also not interesting to use. This team-up gives Rocket a deployable, which is not destroyable, oddly enough. When an allied Punisher or Winter Soldier stands near this deployable, they're given an increased fire rate and infinite ammo. This is really strong enough to overcome a support ult in the right circumstances. But similarly to Rocket's Revive Beacon, it's not very interesting to use. You just place it and hope your Punisher or Winter Soldier can make the most of it. If Rocket could benefit from this beacon himself, like if it gave him infinite ammo or made it so he could shoot his minigun and heal at the same time, or something like that, this could be pretty exciting, but right now it's just kinda lame. Cloak and Dagger have a team up, but they're the anchor, so there's nothing to talk about there. Luna Snow is the anchor for the chilling Charisma team up, but Jeff benefits from this, so we'll take a look. This team up gives Jeff the ability to temporarily enhance his damage, giving his shots a larger splash damage radius as well as making them inflict a minor slow effect. This is alright, but it requires you to shoot instead of heal, and we've already discussed why that's a bad idea. It pairs nicely with a Luna Snow ult because it makes your whole team invincible anyway, or with a triple support comp where you have two other supports helping you with the healing, but those moments are fleeting and uncommon, respectively. Luna Snow has a second team-up, however, with Iron Fist functioning as the anchor. The Atlas Bond team-up gives Luna Snow a new ability that inflicts a slow and knockback on nearby enemies while healing the Luna Snow and her allies. It's alright, but it's little more than another tool that helps Luna escape from dives. Of course, if you're really determined, or just really lucky, you can use this to launch people into bottomless pits, but outside of certain maps like Super Soldier Factory or Warrior Falls, I wouldn't bet on this working consistently. And finally, we have Invisible Woman, who is an anchor. So not even the team-ups save our supports from being kind of lame to play. So by now, I've laid out all the problems I have with the support experience in Marvel Rivals. Let's recap. I'm dissatisfied with the support ultimates in this game because half of the supports have ultimates that do the same thing, a big AoE heal that effectively makes your whole team invincible. This is both not interesting to play against because the ultimates can be chained together to effectively shut the game down for extended periods, and also not interesting to play with, because an impactful play is being cheapened because of how many supports can make that same play, and because a big AoE heal doesn't help realize the fantasy of playing as many of the characters who have it. I'm also dissatisfied with the state of most of the support's kits due to the restrictions placed upon them by the game's doctrine of extreme simplicity in its character design and the game's very low time to kill. The simplicity directly deprives most of the supports of fun and interesting utility options in favor of abilities that are extremely easy and or uninteresting to use. While the low TTK, combined with this doctrine of simplicity, has created an environment where the average support player will hardly ever get to make fun, impactful offensive plays, which makes the average support game much less interesting and fun. Okay, so that's where I think the problems with the supports in Marvel Rivals lie. Now, how do I think these problems should be addressed? Well, this is a hero shooter, so in proposing changes, we need to keep in mind the question: what is the fantasy a person might be trying to fulfill by playing this character? Let's take Cloak and Dagger. When someone picks this character, they probably want to experience Cloak and Dagger fighting side by side, right? Now, does their kit fulfill this fantasy? Kinda? You are given opportunities to swap to Cloak, but I'd say 90% of your time is going to be spent on Dagger. This is because, out of the two, Dagger is the only one who can heal, and as we've discussed, not healing for even a moment is super risky. Now, we can't increase the game's time to kill. That's a non-starter. And we can't just give Cloak the ability to heal unconditionally, because that would make his kit butt heads with daggers. So here's an idea. Make it so while Cloak is attacking someone affected by his blind, he releases an aura of healing in a radius around him. This will allow you to better follow up on enemies made vulnerable by your blinds, without putting your team at too much risk of just dropping dead because you stopped healing. and it would allow you to spend more time playing Cloak without making Dagger useless, because Dagger's healing would be a lot more reliable and consistent. And yes, I'm aware you can drop Dagger's healing bubble and then swap to Cloak to attack enemies, but because the bubble is static and its radius is so small, it doesn't really help you push. It can be nice for making defensive holds, but not much else. So I think the buff I've proposed would allow Cloak and Dagger to better fulfill the fantasy of playing Cloak and Dagger, while also making their kit more engaging by allowing you to make offensive plays without your team suffering too much from it. But of course, I'm not done there. Cloak and Dagger also have one of the boring, make your team invincible ultimates. In terms of fulfilling the fantasy of Cloak and Dagger, I mean, the animation is cool, and it gives you an excuse to swap to Cloak, because if your team is invincible, there's no reason to be healing them, but it's not doing much for me. I think my idea for a rework would be way more interesting. My vision for this is to turn Cloak and Dagger's ultimate into an enhancement ultimate. In the lore of Marvel Rivals, the reason only one out of the Cloak and Dagger pair can exist at a time is basically because their fates, their souls, and whatever have become all entangled. My idea for their new ultimate would be for Cloak and Dagger, through an act of sheer will, to untangle themselves from each other, allowing them both to exist at the same time for, let's say, 10 seconds. In this state, Cloak will hover over Dagger's shoulder, and while you're healing allies as Dagger, Cloak will automatically target nearby enemies to damage them. In addition, when you use your healing wall as Dagger, Cloak will automatically throw his blind a second or so later, regardless of if the blind is on cooldown. Here's the kicker though, you can still swap between Cloak and Dagger in this state. When swapping to Cloak, Dagger will instead be hovering over your shoulder, and while you're shooting enemies as Cloak, Dagger will automatically target nearby allies with healing. In addition, Cloak's blind will work in the inverse of how I've already described, with Dagger throwing her healing wall soon after you've thrown your blind, regardless of whether or not it's on cooldown. This, I think, would not only be more fun to use, but would do way more to achieve the fantasy of playing Cloak and Dagger. You get to make plays by being able to toss two blinds one after the other, and you also get to do so without worrying so much about your team dying because they're still getting healed. And to top it all off, you get to see Cloak and Dagger properly fighting side by side. This is the most important thing to me when I suggest changes here. I want the characters to be more fun to play, and I want them to realize the fantasy of playing as that character. Now, I recognize that some people will no doubt have balance concerns. How are abilities like Spider-Man's ultimate going to be balanced without these invincibility support ults to counter them? To that, I say, just nerf the overpowered ultimates. Like what? Why is that even a question? Just give them longer wind-ups so there's a more reasonable period of time to react to them or something, I don't know. And stop acting like what I'm saying is unreasonable. If you actually thought about it, you'd know that there were only like 2 or 3 ultimates you'd have to nerf. Anyway, Luna Snow is the only ultimate I'm confident that I'd leave mostly unchanged, due to the fact that it's the most iconic out of all of them. As for the rest of her kit, I'm not so sure. I find her kit to be pretty uninteresting, but I'm not really sure how I would enhance it. One idea I've had is to make it so any allies marked with Share the Stage will receive healing whenever Luna Snow deals damage in addition to sharing and healing she does to other teammates. This could allow her to make the occasional offensive maneuver without leaving an important player like a tank high and dry, but it wouldn't allow her to go full DPS since she can only mark one ally at a time and would need to take her eyes off the enemy to apply a mark to someone else. Of course, though, we can't forget to analyze the fantasy of playing Luna Snow here. Luna Snow is a K-pop idol with ice powers, and while they lean into the K-pop part of her identity plenty in this game with her animations, her sound effects, and her ultimate, that leaves the ice powers part to the wayside. Her only truly ice-themed abilities are her stun and her passive speed boost. So if we want to look at giving her extra utility, more ice stuff is probably a good place to look. Canonically, her ice powers are very strong, so maybe she could do something impressive like create a big pillar of ice that blocks shots similar to a Mei wall from Overwatch. Though we already have a lot of walls thanks to Groot, so maybe that's not a great idea. I've also been thinking about the Aurora Borealis while thinking about Luna Snow. Maybe she could create a wall of shimmering light that enemies couldn't see through but her allies could. That could be neat. and it could be tied back to her identity as a performer. Or, I don't know, maybe she gets to crack people with the ice strap or something. Again, I'd like to hear other people's ideas on this. Moving on to Jeff, I want to be more careful than I might be otherwise. Jeff is one of the game's designated beginner characters, and I don't want to make him too weird or else it might push newer players away. That said, I have two ideas. The first is mostly a joke, the second one less so. If you've played the Winter Jeff event game mode they had a couple months ago, you might remember that in that game mode, Jeff's water spout did a slight amount of damage to enemies hit by it. I'm thinking, what if we brought that into the main game? Have his water spout deal both healing to allies and damage alongside a minor slow or maybe a really small amount of knockback or something to enemies. This could make Jeff more interesting to play by incentivizing you to find angles that allow you to hit as many teammates and enemies as possible, and I think this would be fun mostly for how obnoxious it would be. I mean, if you want to talk about the fantasy of playing as Jeff, I think being an obnoxious little bastard is a big part of that. My second idea is to make it so his healing bubbles leave lingering puddles of water behind when they pop. Allies standing in these puddles will get healing over time and maybe some kind of other bonus, while enemies standing in these water puddles will take damage. The idea here is to make using your healing bubbles more engaging. With this, you can more effectively use healing bubbles as fallback points for your team, and you can use clever positioning of these bubbles to ward enemies away from certain areas, allowing Jeff to take and hold space. And of course, you can also use the healing provided by these puddles to give you a moment to take your eyes off your teammates and push the enemy. For Invisible Woman's kit, I think the only thing I'd change would be to give her a minor damage buff. I think her utility could be plenty satisfying to use. It's just that it would feel so much better if she could more reliably follow up on the openings created by those abilities. As for her ultimate, though, well, have you noticed that Invisible Woman's voice line for her ultimate while she's on your team is "shields up"? My idea for reworking Invisible Woman's ult is to make it a shield. Think kind of like a Symmetra ultimate from Overwatch. Have it work identically to how it works now, but remove its healing, and instead make it a barrier with, let's say, just for the sake of the pitch, 5,000 health. This way, the ultimate is still powerful in many of the same ways that it is now, but it doesn't make your whole team unkillable, and has other notable differences. The shield still creates an area the enemies do not want to fight in because of the slow, and it helps protect your team by giving them a massive barrier to hide behind. You could still use it to push through choke points or make defensive holds. You could still use it as a safe place for Scarlet Witch or Iron Man to channel their ultimates just like before, but this time it's actually fun to fight against. If the enemy team is brave enough, they can just walk through the shield and try to have a fight anyway. Alternatively, if they're feeling up to it, they might try to just break the shield real quick to allow the fight to continue like normal. With this new ultimate, the fight isn't just being shut down for one side for the duration of the ult. The other side still has choices to make. Now, Loki is such a fun character when you actually get to fight the enemies. His invisibility, his clones, his teleport, and his solid damage can really make you feel like the god of mischief. But the problem is that you never get to play sneaky with Loki because you can't heal while playing sneaky. Loki is perfectly positioned to leverage additional offensive power in fights. He just needs some way to heal his teammates while he's fucking around on the flanks or in the enemy's backline. Well, I did say earlier that Loki's totem wasn't very satisfying to use, so let's rework it into something else. My inspiration for this is Maldamba from Paladins, a character with good healing that also has a viable flanker playstyle. I want to take Loki's totem and instead make it function similarly to Maldamba's gourd. When the ability is cast, Loki will throw a magical projectile that will etch a rune into the earth where it lands, and this rune will then create a zone of healing that lingers for a while. The idea here is that if you see an opportunity to duck into the flank for a pick, you can toss a rune out for your team so they won't be left high and dry while your attention is turned elsewhere. This would also give you a similar choice to Maldamba when it comes to using your rune, though. You could, as I've just described, use it to help your team, but you could also use it to enhance the effectiveness of your flanks. Tossing a rune to initiate a fight will make you a much scarier threat because you're forcing the enemy into a fight where you have multiple advantages in the element of surprise and a self-heal. You need to carefully balance the healing provided by the rune and its cooldown so that Loki doesn't just become a pseudo DPS like Adam Warlock, but I think this would go a long way to helping Loki do more than just create a gun line with his clones and shoot his teammates. Now, Adam Warlock I think I'm happy with. I mean, when it comes to the fantasy of playing Adam Warlock, he's basically laser space Jesus, and yeah, I'd say he fulfills that fantasy. He lasers people good and can bring himself back to life. Like, yeah, I'm happy with that. Some people want him to have some kind of enhanced mobility, but at that point I'd have serious balance concerns. Adam Warlock would basically become a Hela that can heal himself and tank Iron Man ults, and nobody wants that. I know I said I found his utility lacking, but with his good damage and ability to consistently engage the enemies in combat, I'm willing to live with that. Honestly, I kinda want to say I'm happy with Mantis too. Mantis' utility is kinda lame, but I really don't have any other ideas. In terms of the fantasy of playing Mantis, she's an adorable, awkward martial arts master who manipulates people's emotions and can put people to sleep, and yeah, Mantis' kit kinda does all that. I still wish she had a tool that was more fun to use than her damage boost, but I'm coming up blank. I love to read other people's ideas on that, though. As for her ultimate, I don't like it thematically, but it fits Mantis' playstyle very well, so I don't know how much I'm willing to change it. I do have a couple ideas I'd like to share, though. My first idea is, basically, keep Mantis' AoE aura and maybe keep the healing but greatly reduce it. Then, whenever Mantis uses her heal or her damage boost, all allies in the radius benefit from that ability in addition to the initial target. I'm not as sure about that idea as I am about some of my others, though. Another idea I've had is to again keep the AoE, but this time all friendlies in the radius get a lifesteal effect, getting a portion of their damage dealt returned to them as healing. This could still work as a pseudo-defensive ultimate while also complementing Mantis' playstyle, but it would rely on your teammates being able to hit their shots, so... you know. Now we close out with Rocket, who is heartbreaking to me because out of all the supports who fail to live up to the fantasy of being that character, Rocket has it the worst. Rocket is a crazy, not raccoon who builds gadgets and likes big guns. But the average Rocket gameplay consists of holding an angle or even just standing vaguely behind your team, shooting healing balls, and not doing much else. We could do so much better. First off, we're working his healing balls. Cut the ammo for them in half, make them larger, make them fly more slowly, make them heal much more, but greatly reduce their fire rate. The intent here is to encourage Rocket to play up front, throwing out big bursts of healing in between bouts of shooting enemies with his minigun. So that fulfills the big gun part. What about the gadgets? Now, what I'm about to say is probably going to be pretty unpopular, but hear me out. I want to remove his revive and rework his beacon. The revive is really strong. I like the idea behind it, but I think it's too strong to go with my new vision for Rocket's kit. And like I've already said, it's just not very satisfying to use. My idea for a new deployable is what I'll call the dispenser. The dispenser would be placed as a deployable that enemies could destroy, though it would have greater health than the beacon. I'm thinking maybe about as much as one of Penny Parker's spider nests. The dispenser would project an AoE heal, and in addition, friendlies standing near the dispenser would get a greatly increased reload speed and maybe increased attack speed or something like that. Also, if you really wanted to, you could have the dispenser produce armor and jump packs like the beacon does, but I'm not concerned about that. The idea behind this ability is to give Rocket a deployable with a variety of use cases. You could, of course, use this aggressively and selfishly, throwing it up front to improve your own survivability and lethality. You could also, however, use this in more clever ways. You could leave a dispenser on the flanks to give your flanking teammates better survivability. Or if you see, say, a Moon Knight up on an angle, you could use your mobility to go up there and give him a dispenser to improve his lethality and staying power. And honestly, you could still work the revive into the dispenser if you felt like you really had to. Give the dispenser a range, and if an ally dies within that range, Rocket can choose to destroy his dispenser in order to revive them. Now, to round out this Rocket rework, I want to make his ultimate more fun to use. Instead of Rocket's boring old amplifier, Rocket would be given the Cat unit. This would work much like his current ultimate, buffing the damage of all nearby friendlies. However, to deploy the Cat, you'd have to first choose a direction for it to move, similar to Squirrel Girl's ult. Once deployed, the Cat would roll along the ground at an even pace and bounce off of walls, again much like Squirrel Girl's ult. This would encourage you to think more about how your ult is deployed, and encourage you and your team to play aggressively and move up with the Cat as it trundles along. But that's not all. The kicker here would be that upon re-firing your ultimate, the Cat will begin a short self-destruct timer, and will then explode violently, dealing big damage to all nearby enemies. This would, of course, give you more choices in how you want to use your ultimate, but more importantly, I think this would just be so fucking wacky and perfectly fitting for Rocket's personality. But now, I want to stress that all of these ideas I've proposed are just ideas. I don't know how these would shake out balance-wise, but quite frankly, that's not what I'm concerned about. And it's clearly not what the developers are concerned about either, considering they buffed Hela and Hawkeye not long ago. I care about the supports being as fun and engaging to play as their DPS and tank contemporaries. I want their kits to have more balance between healing, utility, and additional offensive power, instead of being mostly all in on healing. I want their ultimates to be more fun and varied and filled with more personality. I want the support players to be allowed to playmake and feel impactful. I want the support players to have more fun. And if you've watched this far and you've disagreed with literally everything I've said, at least understand that that's my motivation. I want the game to be as fun as possible for everyone who plays it. And right now, I think the support players are getting the short end of the stick. Okay, so this is going to be a mostly unedited, mostly unscripted outro for the video. So I've for a long time wanted to make a YouTube video like this, especially a like hour-long video essay. And I was not expecting to enjoy the process as much as I did. I really enjoyed making this video. So, like all the standard YouTube shit, it would mean the world to me if you like this video, just, like it and comment it and maybe share it around if you feel like it. And especially maybe consider subscribing to my channel, because I would just love the excuse to make more videos like this. It's just, yeah, just, but, still, if you've gotten this far, thank you for watching. Thank you so much for doing that, because, I just, putting something out there, just, standard YouTuber bullshit, putting something out there like this, and then having someone enjoy it, is really cool. So just thank you for being here and listening to this, or yeah, just watching or listening to this video. uh you know kind of feel silly for making a whole section of the video for this, because I don't really have much to say besides all the standard YouTube stuff. Just thank you so much for watching, and I would love any excuse to continue to make more of these. So yeah, I guess this is the end of the video. Farewell.